Okay.
We got
All
Russell
right.
and George's back on something about alien encounters being consistent with the Bible. You're on with Scott and Matt. How are you?
Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm so glad for grabbing me back. Thank you so much.
Sure, welcome.
Good to talk to you, Russell.
I just wanted to set the tone for this conversation before I dive in and let you know that I am going to keep it very brief. I know there's so many people as anxious to me to get on here and chat with you guys. Matt, I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been watching you guys on YouTube since I was like 13 for many years, and I'm 24
That doesn't make me feel old at all. I think Scott was 12 when I started.
I've got a lot of respect for you, and I never really thought I'd get the chance to actually talk to you on this show. So it's an honor. But I'll go ahead and get right into it.
Thank you.
That was really vague as far as what my point was on that. But there was just three things I wanted to go over and get your feedback that I was completely open to and open to going back and doing my homework if that's what it comes to. But the first thing is, as I listen to you guys show a lot, I hear a lot of times that we're pointing out to a lot of the things in the Bible that I myself, you, and many other people just wouldn't agree with in our day and age, from slavery to the massacres. And, it's raised questions for me growing up and something that I never understood. But a perspective that I came into was kind of when I had children. And I have two boys, a 3 and a 4-year-old, and there's so many times where I have so many principles that I want them to have when they grow up to understand that I'm not hard on them, but I'm not like typical fathers. And what I mean by that is, I make sure my kids go outside, whether it's hot, cold, regardless. I make sure that they read, they do things that aren't always exactly fun. And my youngest one is always crying at night, saying to his mother, why won't Dad hold my hand when we go to sleep every single night? I do it sometimes, but I don't do it every night. And he's upset, he's crying, and she tries to explain to him that he's a kid. And in that moment, even though I love him and I'm just trying to let him know that he can't have attachments all the time and he can't depend on me and I'm not always going to be there, I have to let him in that moment be upset and pretty much hate me for it. And the way I perceive God is that...
Yeah. I'm asking, do you? Because so I'm guessing that you're originally from the United States as I am, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I would have probably thought the same thing once upon a time. And then my brother adopted my niece and nephew, who were both Korean. And in Korea, it's far more typical for children to just sleep with parents for a long time. And so this attachment that you're trying to get your children to avoid, another culture actually encourages. So how do we know which one is right or better?
Well, I wouldn't say that we do. That's definitely, there's opinion circled around that. And what I'm getting at is I believe I love my children and I'm doing what I'm doing because I love them. And even though I know it has backlash to it, and in those moments I have to deal with him being upset, and there's so many different examples, I believe I'm doing what's best for him. And me as his parent, for the most part, I believe most good parents out there, not every parent is a good parent, but for most good parents out there, we know we're doing the right thing. And I look at it in the perspective of God is that our morality, which is constantly changing over time, one minute we think things are right, and years later we find out we were wrong, and 70 years from now we say we were wrong about that. I feel like it's unfair to judge the things that God has decided to do when the way the story is told is that we're the children and he's the parent, and that if he loves us as we believe him to love us, we will never understand, just like a child will never understand why a parent does what they do.
I'm going to let Scott completely address this for now and hold off because I'm about to go nuclear rant mode. So go ahead, Scott.
I knew that I could see on your face that you were going to do that. I'm going to rescue Russell from you. So Russell, first of all, I got to tell you, man, any parent who tells me that they're certain they're doing the right thing scares me. And I say this as a parent. I mean, half of parenthood to me is the uncertainty that I'm in fact doing the right thing, that I am making the right choice, the healthy choice for my children. But of course, I'm not omniscient, right? And that's part of your point. Yes, there are certain things that fall within a sort of framework of what could be good or what could be bad parenting. But I don't think anyone in the world would think maybe you were doing the right thing if you set your child on fire, right? Or if you sent a bear to maul your child to death. Or, I mean, we could name countless things that appear to be a clear vestige of a society that did not know down from up when it comes to morality, right? Because morality changes, we get wiser, we move on. So is it, do you recognize that there are some things that we don't actually have to say, well, maybe God had a good reason for burning someone for eternity?
I respect and I see where you're coming from 100%. And like I said at the beginning of the call, I myself have asked these questions. And one of my favorite questions that Matt has constantly said is, why doesn't God just drop down here, show himself, and then we'd all believe? Because I've asked that same question growing up is, why does it have to be so difficult? Why can't
I got another question for you.
Sure.
If God made us incapable of understanding his plan, how could he possibly judge us for failing to understand his plan? What kind of batshit crazy, asinine, immoral thug creates people and does not give them the ability to comprehend a plan and then punishes them for not understanding the plan?
I kind of expected you to ask that question, and I don't have the answer to that. I understand where you're coming from when you ask that question, because I wouldn't say I phrased it that way, the way you just did, but I've felt the same way on many different occasions. But just to, and I'm not conceding or saying that I'm right, but just so I can save time for everybody else and you guys, I want to say one more thing on this point, and I'm just going back to the very start of it when I said, of course, I would never set my child on fire. That is me. That's my objective opinion, and I don't agree.
What if God told you to?
That would be helping my child.
What if God told you to?
Of course, not in the sense that I would do it. No,
What if God told you to?
Totally, I couldn't do it. That's something I just couldn't do. I could not obey that because I could not get past my own moralities that I think is right. But what I'm coming back to is, in the next 50 years, all these things that we're saying is okay, that's going to change. And then they're going to keep flip-flopping and keep changing. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm saying our morality is so fickle. We can't ever take it as it's absolutely correct, because it's just going to
I agree there.
Every so many odd years.
I would agree. Our current understanding of what is moral is not absolutely correct. Our current understanding of the universe isn't absolutely correct. We're learning and constantly improving, but it's not like we're going to turn around and say, you know what? Lopping off people's heads randomly was moral all this time, and we just didn't know it. That's not going to happen.
No, I couldn't see that happening either.
Right.
And that's when it comes back to me, even as a theist.
See, the thing is,
a question that I'll never understand.
The other foundational flaw behind everything you're saying is you have this presumption that there is a God who has a plan, and I have no evidence of that. I have plenty of people telling me about a plan or telling me to trust a God that has a plan, but I got into this discussion, and I'm going to do this very cautiously, about politics the other day, where somebody suggested that as somebody who was not a fan of the current administration suggested that maybe if we all got together and supported the current administration for another 4 years, that would make things so bad that we would never have to deal with the things that they don't like again. And I was like, so basically you want to roll the dice that if we make things really awful, we'll cure racism and poverty and all of these other issues, and we'll have, healthcare for all by burning it all to the ground. And I can't do that because, first of all, I don't see that as a likely outcome of this. And also, the fucking house is on fire from my perspective right now. And you deal with immediate triage. So it's nice to say, hey, my children have to trust me, except that children only have to trust you to a point. And you, as the parent, should be one of the first ones to acknowledge that you're likely to be wrong, should be encouraging children to question, even to the point of where they're rambunctious and rebellious, because at least now you know they're not just going to take everything that you tell them as gospel. That scenario that becomes analogous to a God having a plan for us is really cute, except A, we have no reason to believe there's a God, no reason to believe there's a plan, and no reason to think that the people who are telling me about God's plan are likely to be right. So at the end of the day, I'm stuck with this believers suggesting that I just need to let go and let God. And I'm like, that's where you get songs like Jesus Take the Wheel. But are you ever going to be driving down the road, take your hands off the wheel, close your eyes and say, drive Jesus, ever? No, you're not. No. And neither is anybody with any sense. So let's stop pretending that this fuzzy analogy that's about doctrine and theology is in any way tied to decisions we make in reality. There's zero decisions I need to make in reality that should consider whether or not there's a God with a plan.
It really is a pretty bad analogy to compare God to a parent. That analogy breaks down in just about every possible way. A good parent, anybody's idea of a good parent is nearly the antithesis of the God that we see in Scripture.
Okay. I respect that. And like I said, I know there's so many other callers, and to save, everybody the time, there was two other things that I wanted to bring up. And one of them, which was very vague on the call screening, was I hear a lot of conversation throughout the years of watching the show about believers, and a lot of times they're countered with, the alien abductions and do we believe in aliens and things like that. And I will be the first one to tell you, I am probably the only person that is a theist that believes in God, but at the same time has a really solid belief on why I feel like it's more probable to think they exist than God does. And I'm talking about that from a scientific standpoint when I say if we're able to verify that there are different planets in our solar system, that there are other suns and other possibilities of sustaining life, would you agree that, only for the fact of the question I'm asking, would you agree that that is more evidence for aliens than we even have for the God that we read in the Bible alone?
Yeah, I don't think our solar system is the key here. We're talking about a universe with, you've got trillions of solar systems in a galaxy. You've got trillions of galaxies. So to deny that there's, or to reject the possibility that there's some kind of life, or intelligent life on some other planet, seems pretty irrational. It's another question altogether whether that life could or would visit us. But I actually think it's pretty consistent. I think it's pretty cool of you as a Christian. I never heard you actually say that you're a Christian, but it sounds like it. To say that maybe God created multiple planets, right? Maybe God created multiple civilizations, and maybe some of them fell and some of them didn't. I actually have a Christian friend who believes this, that there are different possible worlds, like, actual planets that, one of them fell, one of them didn't, and each one goes its own way. I kind of hold his feet to the fire about the logistics of that and how that exactly would work. But it does seem like an awful waste of space if you're a creator to,
One thing that drives me insane is that we have this attitude about the Bible that the story was written and then it just stopped. To where, if you actually believe, for the people that do believe in God, like we say we do, there's a story being written right now, that we're not picking up or buying in a store or reading about online. And one thing that drives me insane is, well, if God is real, then there's no possibility that aliens can be real. But what I don't like about that statement is God himself, and let's take the vernacular I see on TV, to what we know, God is an alien himself. And I say that because he's clearly, if he exists, above us, and he is not from here. If anything, I don't see why it's so hard to adopt the process that if these encounters are real and they do exist, they could lead to the very questions that we have about God himself. What do you guys say to that?
I don't believe that people are actually being visited or abducted by aliens. And you seem like a really nice person who's currently willing to accept anything that might potentially have any sort of evidential support as a possibility, ultimately in a sense that leads to something that's utterly useless, where you're like, oh, well, God's an alien or whatever. The notion that we're alone in the universe, when you look at things like the Drake equation, I'm convinced that there's a strong likelihood that there's life elsewhere in the galaxy just because of the size, or in the universe, just because of the size of it. Whether or not it's intelligent, who knows? Whether or not it's still around, who knows? But the distances required for coverage suggest that it's unlikely, and the unremarkable nature of our tiny little blue orb suggests it's incredibly unlikely that aliens have actually visited. And the only way to get around this is through conspiracy theory thinking, where it's just a big hidden conspiracy, like the aliens haven't shown up and interacted with people, and they just seem to want to mutilate cows and teach people how to build big piles of rocks, or put drawings of people with huge penises on the sides of things, or draw lines somewhere. It is absolutely conspiracy theory thinking, which it means that you take disparate facts and weave together a compelling narrative that on the surface seems reasonable and yet does not have a foundation underneath it.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't get from Russell that he's arguing that we've been visited by aliens. Now, maybe Russell does happen to believe that, but I took his point to be something. And Russell, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember Michael Shermer once making an interesting point about how we view the supernatural. And he said, if there is such a thing as the supernatural, it can only be mysterious for so long. The more we know about the supernatural, the more we realize that even that realm of reality would have to have its own laws and its own behaviors, yep, and its own cause and effect. So I am sympathetic to the idea that if there was something that we perceive as a God, we're starting with the assumption that a God exists, and there's something that we perceive as that God, that it's not unthinkable that there's a naturalistic explanation for what we think is a God. Now, the problem with that is that in taking that position, you do have to reject certain parts of Scripture, and of course. Mm-hmm. You probably reject many parts of Scripture. Even the most fundamentalist Christian rejects certain parts of Scripture because there's too much tension with what we know empirically to be true. But I think the idea that God is an alien just sounds like a really, really oversimplified way of saying God is not supernatural and couldn't be supernatural. You just peel enough layers away and then you just get more nature. Does that sound right?
To an extent, and to respond to what Matt said about the conspiracy theories and different things like that, Matt, I don't acknowledge in a lot of people's thoughts and the possibilities. For me, I always, ever since I was really young, I take an investigative standpoint from it, and I love the phrase "where there's smoke, there's fire," and I always look at it from the degree of, okay, if I'm investigating a murder and I don't know who committed this murder, but I've got multiple witnesses tell me that they saw this one guy cross that house just hours before it happened, I'm not saying that guy committed the murder. But if I find that consistency in everybody's story when they've got different stories, but this guy is always crossing that house in every story, no one's claiming that he did it, that guy becomes very interesting and a key piece to my investigation. So my angle is not that, a lot of these conspiracy theories about the aliens, they're real and this is exactly what's happening. I'm not gullible about that. My point here is, like he said, I'm not looking at God like everyone else as this invisible being that is supernatural when he could just be godlike because he's above us, because he knows more than we do, because he knows how to start life. Maybe even in that scientific standpoint that we talk about, but we just haven't been able to understand that yet.
Okay, whose fault? Whose fault, Russell? Whose fucking fault is it that we don't understand God?
I have no idea.
It's got to be God's. If there's a God and God made us and he made us incapable of understanding, it must be his fault, right? How could it possibly be my fault that I don't understand the person who created me? How could that possibly be my fault?
Well, I know the path you're going down here, but
There's no path. I'm done. I'm at the
He's
end
already
of the
down
fucking
it.
point. It's there. Whose fault is it? If God created us and he created us unable to understand him, whose fault is that?
Sure, that would be his fault.
Exactly.
But I can go back to the analogy about me taking my son.
You
and
can
if I don't want
analogize
him to be
all you
afraid of
want,
fire-
but the argument is defeated at that point. Whose fault is it? It's like if somebody wrote a video game and the characters in the video game were too stupid to follow directions. Whose fault is that?
Sure, I understand, but
There's
the point
no way
is
out
that
of this.
I'm not calling you guys. I'm not calling you guys to win a discussion or win a debate. To be more,
What are you calling us
To me,
for? Because I'm confused now and I don't know.
the premise here is to bring a totally different perspective to ease up the fact that
Okay. Well,
maybe
the premise of the show,
the
premise of the show, Russell, is for people to talk about what they believe and why, so that we can evaluate it to tell whether we agree or disagree. So I'm not interested in navel gazing, speculative, bong hit. Let's talk about aliens and God. I want to know what people believe and why, and whether or not there's good reason to believe it. And if at the end of the day, you've just got some analogies that still don't undermine the fact that you're trying to say, maybe we just don't understand God. You know what? Maybe we do. You can sit here all day long and do the maybe we don't understand God, but your argument falls apart because in your view, God is the creator who created us incapable of understanding. In my view, there isn't a God, and I think we understand that.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then I would end my entire conversation with the question, leading into what brought me into being a believer in the first place. Matt, you said that you were, and I believe you. It's a shame that some callers have called here and they've challenged your walk.
Okay, that doesn't bother me. Just get to the question. Just get to the question. It doesn't bother me what callers say about me. I don't even care what some of my friends say about me. Go ahead.
Was there ever a time in your life where you asked God for things or you asked for his guidance and you honestly believe that he answered your prayers? I'm sure the answer is yes.
Yes, there were times where I was convinced that I had answered prayer. Yes.
Now ask me that question.
Just because.
We will.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. And let's reply that same question to you.
No. And you know what the difference between me and Matt is?
What's that?
I
never believed in God.
Okay.
So now you get two wildly different perspectives. So continue on with your question. You've got two different answers. Let's go. This has been fun.
Well, what I'm asking you now is, what made you come from, I'm 100% sure that God was responsible for
I didn't say that.
So were you ever at a point where you asked God for something, or you prayed to him and he fulfilled it for you? Did it ever happen to you when you were psychopath?
No, what I said, you asked me if I was ever convinced that God answered prayer. Yes. Was I ever 100% certain? I've never been 100% certain of anything in my entire life. So did I at one point think that God had answered prayer? Yes. Do I still think that God answered prayer? No. And the difference between that is because I evaluated how one would go about figuring out whether or not a God actually answered prayer, or whether a human being with a flawed understanding actually became convinced that a God answered prayer, when in fact that isn't what happened. Understanding the nature of evidence and what it should take to prove a point is what ultimately convinced me that my prior belief in God was incorrect.
So is it unfair to say that if you've never been 100% certain that he answered your prayer, that you weren't actually a believer? Would you have to be 100% certain?
No, I'm not. I've never been 100% certain. No, Russell, I've never been 100% certain about anything, and I do not think anyone can be 100% certain about anything.
Okay. Just to briefly go over why I asked you that question. For me, when I was coming to my walk of understanding what I thought creation was and going over Buddhism and everything else, I gave a lot of my time and energy, and I feel like a lot of people can say that. But
Russell, I honestly don't think we need the story. We went through everything. You asked a question. I answered with a yes. Scott answered with a no. You then misrepresented my answer to be about 100% certainty, and I've corrected that. At the end of the day, I used to believe, and now I don't. And the reason I don't is because I gained a better understanding of the nature of evidence of what should convince people, and found out that I had been convinced for bad reasons, which is why I'm happy to talk to people like you and point out why I think you are convinced for bad reasons. But I don't need another story about why you asked a question.
Okay. It's the fact that for me, that answer isn't a no. And to respond to you on the line as well. That
Okay,
answer isn't a no.
I was politely trying to end the call, and now I'm just going to hang up and move on to somebody else.